Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Trevor Stainwright. I'm regarded as something of an authority on the subject of wind and watermills of Northamptonshire, but I'll let you be the judge of that. Basically, I've been working on windmills, writing about them ever since I was a teenager. I'm now in my 60s, so I've hopefully learned something during that period. Could we have number one, please, Bob? Thank you. This is a picture of me a couple of years ago at Whissendine in Rutland. I've helped out at a number of mills in my time, including the restoration of Quainton Mill in Buckinghamshire, the Watermill in Wellingborough, which is known as Turnill's Mill. There's not much left of it, but there's a little bit more than was. And I sometimes help out at the mill at Ullersthorpe in Leicestershire. Here, I'm working on the sales of the mill at Whissendine in Rutland, which actually works. And it's, as well as being owned by a very dedicated gentleman called Nigel Moon, he has surrounded himself with a team of volunteers, and I like to pride myself as being one of them. Okay. Now I'd like to introduce the subject matter with a very brief introduction. Number two, please. Right. The windmills of this county generally date back to the time of the Domesday Book of 1086. It's known that some sites date back even further to Saxon times. Number three, please. Early examples would have had very large thatched roofs, built in a very primitive style with external wheels. This particular one is at Cosgrove, which we'll be hearing about a little bit later. Come the Industrial Revolution, watermills became more advanced, adopting steam power, growing in size and efficiency. 7 rivers crossed this county, and many of them became household names, such as the Nen, the Welland, and the Cherwell. Number 4, please. Thank you. Windmills appeared in Northamptonshire about the 14th century, and they would have been early versions of the post mill. You can see on this map here, there's just about 50 to 60 or so, which gives a brief insight. Add to that the 30 tower mills and a dozen or so smock mills, and you've got a very large collection distributed throughout the county. We've included Peterborough, the top part of the map. Peterborough was part of Northamptonshire until 1965. It is, of course, now part of Cambridgeshire, but originally the windmills and the watermills that stand in that vicinity were originally built as Northamptonshire mills. Next, please. Right. As I said, post mills were the dominant mill of Northamptonshire, and this example is at Naseby. As you can see, it was built in 1725 and was senselessly pulled down in 1919 while very much in this condition. This is called an open trestle mill because the substructure is comprises of a main post which would have ascended to the centre of the mill. This allowed the body to be pivoted around by pushing on a tail pole. You can just see it there. The sails are cloth-covered common sails, which look like a very basic trellis work. And the leading edge, the broad part of the sails, this shows that it rotated in a clockwise direction. Now, this is unusual because most other mills throughout the rest of the country rotated in an anti-clockwise direction, but some mills here, Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire, and mostly Northamptonshire, especially Northamptonshire, I'd like to say, the mills rotated in a clockwise direction. That is very unusual, and I can't understand why it's never been written about before. Go in any library, look at any book about windmills, Northamptonshire is always missing. Next, please. Here we have another post mill. This is Scoldwell Mill. Looking at the leading edge of these common sails, you can see that again, this mill rotated in a clockwise direction. It is equipped with a roundhouse. Now, the roundhouse never actually took the weight of the mill. It was just there to provide storage space and protection for the trestle. This mill succumbed in 1916, and you can see it's a particularly ruinous example, but as again I say, if you look carefully, you can see elements of the trestle structure, and there were almost 100 or so examples of post mill in this county. Thank you. Next, please. An improvement on the post mill was the smock mill. They were never very common in Northamptonshire. This one at Eye in Peterborough was actually a drainage mill. It is one of 3 that survived into the 20th century, and I can only picture 6 or 7 examples of smock mill that were ever built in Northamptonshire. And basically, it's a brick foundation with a wooden tower. And this picture has been included because if you see the boards are assembled in a vertical situation rather than horizontally. This was common in the East Anglian region. Next picture, please. Here we have another smock mill. This is Rosedon near Wellingborough. The brick base is actually 1 story high in this respect. We have a wooden body which has a tarred felt coating, very unusual itself. A rotating cap does the same job as the mill body in a post mill, bringing the sails into wind with the aid of a fantail, which was an automatic device invented in 1750. If you look carefully, you can see they're in an assortment of sails. The reefed common sails, which is the earliest type, and the shuttered sails. In this case, they were spring operated, very much like a Venetian blind. Later shuttered sails would have been operated by a chain at the rear of the mill. Hauling on this would have allowed the sails to snap open and shut, as I say, very much like a Venetian blind. Another aspect in this photograph is the use of steam power. The little traction engine-like thing is actually a boiler with wheels called a portable engine, and this would have coupled up via a belt to the pulley near the first floor window to give an auxiliary drive power to another set of stones. Next, please. Right. A logical development of the smock mill was the tower mill. Being built of brick or stone, it allowed the structure to be built higher, wider, incorporating much more space, room for stones, extra equipment, and storage space. Again, you can see it has a rotating cap driven by a fantail, which is in a ruinous condition. We also have the sails, again, working in a clockwise direction. And here we have a mixture of common sails and shuttered sails, which were invented after 1804, the patent sail. Thank you, Bob. This is a cutaway of a typical tower mill. This particular example was at Helidon, which is now a house conversion. You see the common sails again, the fantail driving the cap, allowing it to transverse around to face the wind. On the sail axle, known as the wind shaft, you have a series of large gears that interact with shafts down to the center of the mill where the stones are. Beneath the stones are the filtering machines known as bolters or wire machines. And one set of stones is actually coupled up to an auxiliary steam engine. Next, please. Right, back to Watermills. This is Gretton, which was demolished in 1960. It is a very humble mill, and it is actually the small building in the center of this photograph. You can see the wash from the rotating wheel. It's a very small mill, a very humble mill. Beside it is the living accommodation, the farmhouse or mill house. On the other side is the granary or the storage barn. Getting away from the chocolate box image of a grand water mill with an external wheel, this is basically a very small mill driving perhaps no more than 1 or 2 pairs of stones. Next, please. From the humble to the grand. This is Twyford Mill on the River Cherwell. And at first appearance, it looks like 2 separate buildings, but it is in fact one watermill. The original 4-story mill and its giant accessory that was built on in 1885 to accommodate something called the roller mill technology, which I will discuss at a later period during this talk. But this mill made the history books for all the wrong reasons. Next picture, please. Now, this photograph dates from about 1912. I believe that's living accommodation, which was demolished soon after this photograph was taken, leaving the bare structure of the 4-story mill and its extension. As I say, it made the history books for all the wrong reasons, because it won fame as one of the very first discount stores in Northamptonshire, selling white goods, beds, and general furniture. And that continued until about the mid-1970s, when the mill was totally gutted. It is now owned by a very sympathetic family who wish to rebuild the roof, which is leaking dreadfully. And hopefully, with luck, they'll be able to rent it out for office space to keep it going. Best of luck with that. Next picture, please. Very much like Twyford Mill is this mill at Towcester, built in 1794 on the River Tove. I'm clever with a camera and I was able to capture this romantic view, but next picture, Bob. If you're not clever with a camera, you can capture the very large extension that was built on in 1912, much for the same reasons, to accommodate roller mill technology. However, it does serve a more important purpose, in my opinion, because it is the home of the Towcester Mill Brewery, and this large extension is part of the main brewery, while the old Watermill serves as a bar and where you can buy the produce. And on a summer's day, I can think of nothing better of sitting in the large garden with a very attractive view of the mill and the mill pond. And hopefully many of you will get that opportunity. It's a lovely building. Thank you very much. Next, please. Right. Now for something romantic. In my opinion, this is the most beautiful mill in Northamptonshire. It is Cosgrove on the River Tove. In 1972, it was said to be 400 years old, but sadly, that same year, a bunch of children and a box of matches saw it burnt to the ground. Very little is left. If that wasn't enough, there is also a tragic story which could have been written by Catherine Cookson. In the early years of the 19th century, a very affluent family moved into the manor house. The Watermill was part of their property. With them was their very beautiful young daughter. And apparently, and I got this from a Women's Institute group, so it must be true, she fell in love with a local shepherd boy. I told you it was Catherine Cookson. Once the parents found out, they were very disapproving, and the young man suffered trumped-up charges of sheep stealing, and he was transported to Australia. When the young daughter found out about this, she was heartbroken, and the story goes, one evening she was devastated and threw herself into the mill pond and was drowned. And now, on a moonlit night, you can see her spirit wandering up and down the vicinity of the mill, looking for her lost lover. Good job it wasn't written by James Herbert. Next, please. If you like ghosts, look no further than Passionham Mill, very near Milton Keynes on the county boundary. The village has a history of ghost stories. One connected to the mill was the local lord of the manor, a 17th century gentleman called Sir Robert Bannister. He had an almost tyrannical reputation, was very disliked by the villagers, even though he did a lot for the church and was supportive of poor people. His name was corrupted to Bobby Bannister, a name that was used to frighten children. Now you behave yourselves, or Bobby Bannister will get you. Next picture, please. Right, this is Passionham today. It is now a house conversion. But after Robert Bannister's death, he was killed in a hunting accident when he fell from his horse and was killed instantly. The night he was laid in his coffin, voices could be heard coming from it. And that same evening, mysterious horsemen and packs of hounds were seen charging through the village. This went on and on and on and on until the locals forced a local bishop to engage in exorcising the spirit. And he did this by casting the ghost beneath the water wheel of the mill. Why, I don't know. Apparently it's the sort of thing that bishops do. However, to no avail, and the hauntings went on. And then television was invented and it all stopped. You can see in this picture that a more modern mill house has been built on to the original watermill. Both are separate living accommodations, and I would hazard a guess that the white mill house dates from the early Victorian period. Thank you. Next, please. Sadly, most of the ghost stories you associate with mills in Northamptonshire were to do with drownings. And this mill at Cotterstock, not far from Oundle, had its share of tragedies. One of the most noted, on the other side of this 4-story mill with its accompanying granaries and warehouses, there was a road bridge which crossed the mill race. On one particular day, a very heavily laden wagon drawn by a team of horses was crossing the bridge. For some reason, the lead horse was spooked. The others reacted by backing up. The wagon hit the verge, pitching the rider into the mill pond. He couldn't swim and was drowned within minutes. This also saw the drowning of a child and a serviceman on leave during the Second World War. Next picture, please. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Unfortunately, Cotterstock continued working until 1968 when an electrical fire caused serious damage. This is a number of rare pictures in my collection. Others will be available at some other time, but this shows the extent of the damage. And that year, the whole plant was demolished. Only one part of one of the granaries exists. It is called Cotterstock Mill and has been altered into apartments. Next, please. More tragedies, this time at Allen's Mill in Woodford. There are actually 2 mills in Woodford. One is the successful tea room, which still exists, but this is Allen's Mill, which was demolished in the 1960s. This picture dates from 1953, and on the other side of the mill, there was a low railway bridge. It still exists, but it is mostly for walkers and joggers. But in early times, it was used as a diving board for daring children. And one of the early victims of drownings was a 6-year-old lad who did it as a dare and did not survive. Next, please. One of the most awful accidents occurred at this mill. This was Ringstead, originally a paper mill. It was converted much later into a standard flour producing mill. But as you can see, it has two wheels adjoining the mill house, and at that time it would have been the place where the hot vats of boiling water were used for cleansing the rags, which were pulped by the wheel. A series of cams and hammers saw these hammers rising and falling, crushing the rags to form part of the paper making process. These vats of boiling water were serviced by women, sometimes with their children, and their duties included keeping them topped up with rags, which were fished out, pulped, and as I say, turned into paper, which was used as sheets put out to dry. I'm sure some of you are aware of that process, but the point of the story is that one lady, a distant relative of the miller, was servicing one of these vats with her young toddler strapped to her chest. Sadly, she bent over too far and the child was pitched into the boiling vat and scalded to death. A particularly ugly and dreadful accident, and I'm sure many people had nightmares about that afterwards. Next, please. This is what was left in Ringstead in the early years of the 20th century. You can see the two accesses for the both wheels in the shape of these arches. This mill was actually demolished. I have here 1936, and today there's a large stone commemorating its existence, and the area has been cleaned up and is part of a marina. Next, Bob, please. Right. Another tragedy occurred at this mill, and this is Borwick on the A43 towards Oundle, near Oundle, I should say. You have on the far left, you have the mill house with its three-storied, the mill house, and adjoining the watermill itself. As is said there, it was built in 1698 and in 1865 was run by the miller, Mr. John Sarrington. Watermills like this are very dangerous places. I've been in a few and I'm horrified to say that sometimes the gear is at head height. It's a very dangerous place to work. You cannot afford to be complacent, but unfortunately in 1865, Mr. Sarrington was. The story goes, he was teaching a young apprentice the arts of milling. He raised his hand, his coat sleeve was caught in part of the machinery, his arm was ripped into the gears, crushing it. The story goes that Mr. Sarrington was hanging there, begging the young man to take action. Apparently, the young guy went into a fit of complete panic, decided the only way to save Mr. Sarrington was by chopping off the offending limb. And the story goes again that he found a scythe which needed sharpening and spent about 10 minutes sharpening this thing before he could deliver the final blow. They then took Mr. Sarrington to the local doctor, who could not help, so they strapped him to a wagon and galloped 8 miles to Stamford, where they hoped a surgeon would be at home. Incredibly, despite the loss of blood and the shock, Mr. Sarrington survived, but after that his milling days were well and truly over. Next, please. After ceasing work, Borwick Mill became a store. It was used during World War II to house refugees, but after the war in the 1950s, it was found to be suffering terrible structural problems. Rather than demolish the whole thing, part of it was truncated, and it now serves as a garage, workshop, and shed. And the door on the right-hand side and the green you see before it was part of the original mill race, which has been filled in. There is not a trace of any machinery inside, but at least this part of the mill still exists. Next, Bob. Not all these terrible accidents happened at Watermills. This is Easton on the Hill Tower Mill, built in 1860. It is on the A43, and anyone on the way to Stamford might catch a glimpse of this in a hedgerow. It is now covered in ivy, but at sometimes during the year it can be seen. If you look at the mill, you'll see it is a typical tower mill of 3 stories. It has low revolving sails which cover the doorway. It's a mixture of shuttered and common sails again. And anyone who's been in a windmill will know the story that mills have 2 opposing doorways. And the idea is you look carefully through a window to see where the sails are revolving, and then you go out the safest doorway. Sadly, a young lady by the name of Jane Stancer did not do this. She was 20 years old and she was running errands for the local miller, a Mr. Dexter. She exited the mill in the path of the rotating sails and was killed outright by one of them, which struck her and caused severe head trauma. This was a particular blow, no pun intended, for the family, because Jane's sister had died of a fever just a couple of years before. Dreadful. Next picture, please. As you can see, the rotation of the sails would have been very close to the ground, and the tail pole gives it very much a Dutch appearance. This was nothing more than a guide for a chain that was connected to a winch, and the chain was looped around various pegs around the mill so that winding on the chain would drag the cap around to face the wind, rather like a fantail would do on any other mill. Next, please. This is what Easton looks like these days. As I say, sometimes during the summer period, it's completely festooned in ivy, but sometimes that ivy dies back. And this is the kind of view you would see of the mill. It is completely empty, and so far it remains one of the very, very few derelicts in Northamptonshire. Next, please. Right. A similar accident occurred at this mill. This is Braunston Mill in the Daventry district. It is the tallest mill existing in Northamptonshire. It was 7 stories high, but in the 1960s it was cut down to 6 stories, but still retains the height honour. As you can see, halfway up, there's the remnants of a stage. This was to serve the chain which looped down, allowing the miller or one of his assistants to trundle the cap around to face the wind. And the stage also served as a reefing area because this was equipped with cloth-covered common sails. You can see the doorway there. And again, a young man, an assistant to the miller, did not pay attention to the position of the sails, exited the doorway, was caught by the sails, killed immediately, and his body was thrown into the local churchyard. You can see the gravestones, but I'm not going to make jokes about that. Next, please. After World War I, the cap was removed, and the mill was used as a builder's store. The builder put these crenellations on the top, giving a castellated appearance. It was used in this formidable guise by the Home Guard during World War II, and after the war went through a series of uses. In the 1960s, it was cut down to 6 stories, given a dome roof, and now serves as holiday accommodation. Next, please. Regretfully, some deaths at mills were not accidental. This is Rawn's Mill, which was built in 1794, and a number of tragedies over a series of years happened at this mills. When I wrote the article about a year ago, I titled it A Widow's Lot, because at least 4 grieving widows had to take over from their late husbands to continue the work at this and the previous post mill that was on its site. This is a bit of a modern mill. You can see it has what they call double patent sails. These would be activated by a chain at the rear of the mill. Hauling on the chain would cause the shutters to snap open or close, very much like a Venetian blind. It has an ogee cap, and behind the cap you can see the fantail, which would have trundled the cap around to face the wind. At the base you can see a pulley, which was adapted for steam, to connect to a steam engine, offering auxiliary power to the stones. This next, please. Thank you. It was a very modern mill for its time, and that's a beautiful picture of it. It was run for many years by the Pentelow family. And the last miller, Mr. James Pentelow, inherited this mill after his father's suicide when he threw himself in the River Nen in a state of depression. James Thomas Pentelow had a very large family of 12 children, and his business was extremely fruitful, but this did not stop him following in his father's footsteps and basically climbing to the top of the mill one evening and hurling himself from the fan stage, which caused his death. No one knows why. Next picture, please. And there is James T. with part of his family. Sadly, this meant that Sarah Jane was the fourth grieving widow to be forced to complete the business until about 1912. The mill was reduced in height in 1920 and eventually pulled down in 1964. Next, please. We've talked about suicide, accident, drownings, ghosts, and now a murder story. This is Rothwell in the Kettering area. Just out of the scope of this map is a watermill and also 4 windmills you can see numbered. Numbers 1 and 2 are very rare because you have a pair of windmills in close proximity. This was rare nationwide, and Northamptonshire had 3 pairs, a pair at Kettering, a similar situation in Wellingborough, and this pair in Rothwell. Mills 1 and 3 were operated by Mr. Benjamin Cheney. He became very wealthy. Unfortunately, only one of these mills was ever photographed. You'll see that in a moment. However, the story of Mr. Cheney. He was in 1855, he was 80 years old and a man of habit. He would habitually walk from Rothwell to Kettering Market with the week's takings. Unfortunately, his habits were well known, and a young man of the name of Isaac Pinnock was waiting for him, and he felled Mr. Cheney with an axe, killing him instantly. But he wasn't very discreet. He was quickly identified and arrested. The murder weapon was sealed his fate, and he was sentenced to death. But because Pinnock was paralyzed down one side of his body, he was commuted to life imprisonment as one of the early inmates of Broadmoor Prison. Next, please. This is a picture of Cheney's Mill on the Rushton Road, which is number 3 on the map. It has an unusual 2-storied roundhouse, and yet this is winded by a tail pole, which meant a team of guys would probably have to push this around, or if they were lucky, couple it up to a horse and let that do the work. Again, it has clockwise rotating sails, but because it has a roundhouse rather than an open trestle, I cannot claim it to be a typical Northamptonshire mill. Next, please. Sometimes the very elements that power mills can overwhelm them. This was the case at Weston Fable. It was a victim of the 1947 floods, and such was the damage that was caused to this mill, which was obviously also powered by steam, as is evident by the very tall chimney, that the structure had to be demolished. Next picture, please. This is all that remains. You can see the 2 arches. The smaller arch is actually a bypass channel. Behind it, the original sluice gear, like a small lock gate, still exists. This was to control the mill to prevent flooding. Unfortunately, in 1947, it didn't help very much. That and the cobbled path to the mills and the mill house still exists, and this is actually part of a public footpath now. So if you're ever in the vicinity of Weston Fable, please look out for these remains. Next, Bob. What can happen to a watermill happened can happen to a windmill, the very elements again. This is Weldon Mill, which was originally built in Rutland and moved to Weldon in, I believe it was the 1820s. It's a very spindly looking mill. And the reason for that is it was originally built with a roundhouse, but when it was re-erected in Weldon, they dispensed with that. Normally, the quarter bars, the diagonal bars supporting the post, would have been built at an angle of 45 degrees, but for some reason, these have been built at 60 degrees. Yet for all that, it survived until 1915, when it was actually overpowered and blown down in a storm. Thank you. Next, please. This mill survived until 1915, as I said. It's a typical, what I would class as a Northamptonshire type post mill. It has common sails and in this case shuttered sails, but again the open trestle. And there we see the miller, Mr. Hunt, on the gatepost, leaning and obviously very proud of his mill. But strangely enough, to the left of Mr. Hunt, you can see that a mysterious figure, has been blacked out of the photograph. Although I make jokes about this being a fancy woman, the truth is I'm not particularly sure why. And this is another thing I say for Women's Institute groups, who always spare a giggle or two when I tell them that. Next, please. After the First World War, only three post mills existed, one in Peterborough, one at Naseby, and this one at Beaujett Mill. The two former mills were quickly demolished, leaving Beaujett near Wellingborough to be the sole example, survivor of post mills. And this example is photographed during the early period of the 20th century. You can see the rather clever person put a cartwheel on the end of the tail pole, which would have made pushing the mill around a lot easier. We have again a collection of shuttered and common cloth sails, and the mill appears to be in good condition. Next picture, please. However, by 1935, when this picture was taken, you can see it has deteriorated. It stopped work just after World War I, and you can see the damage that it endured during its abandonment. Many tried to get this mill preserved and saved. Unfortunately, the First World War, and the shortage of money afterwards, the Depression, World War II, and the post-war austerity meant that there was never enough money to save it. And in 1949, in this kind of condition, it was blown over and completely destroyed. And so ended the story of the Northamptonshire post mills. Next, please. One of the reasons many mills closed down were because of these. And this is Whitworth's Mill in Wellingborough, originally steam powered, but eventually powered by electricity. These adopted something called the roller mill technology. And the roller mill was basically a safe, self-contained unit comprising of steel or ceramic rollers with filtering capabilities. It transformed the whole milling process. With this kind of technology, and there were many of them installed within such mills, the traditional windmills and watermills could not compete. This age, expense, and later legislation all contributed to these mills becoming obsolete. Steam mills such as this existed in Wellingborough, and very cleverly, Whitworths built their mill near a river, a railway, and a roadway. And with their own fleet of transport, there was just no way that traditional mills could compete. There was also Haygates at Northampton, actually in Bugbrook, Wallace's at Burton Latter, which became Weetabix, and there were other such steam mills which cornered the market. And up against this, windmills and watermills, unless they were very lucky, fell victim and were quickly made obsolete. Next picture, please. During the 1970s, it wasn't unusual to see derelict mills in this part of the county and throughout England. This is Helidon Mill. It was derelict in 1972, and again, there was a lobby to try and save this mill. But because of Daventry District Council's short-sightedness, the mill was sold for house conversion, and its sails and original machinery were ripped out, and it was quickly converted into a home. Today, it stands as just nothing but a cream-coloured lighthouse on a hill, all its windmill artefacts long lost. Thank you, Daventry District Council. Next, please. However, in the 1980s, a new phenomenon arose, and that was the house conversion. Although there is a dim side to this, it has saved many mills from destruction. Here we see the example of Watermills, a very attractive mill. Next picture, please. And here we see it, just as good. Here we see it as a house conversion. Apart from a series of windows, things like the conservatory and the fire escape, it is very much in its original condition. The other side of the conservatory, the very sympathetic owner has encased many of the watermill features in glass, including the original sluice mechanism, and on the other side, a turbine which replaced the original watermill during its working life. Next picture, please. Within the mill, there are a number of timbers with signs of its previous activities. And in the main bedroom, this treated and white painted sack hoist remains as a very dominant feature. Next, please. What is good for a watermill is good for a windmill. I took this picture in 1980 of Barby Tower Mill in the Daventry district. The pond you see before you has been extended to a lake and now serves as a fishing ground. The mill was just an empty shell during that year, but since 1999, it has been transformed into a home conversion. Next, please. This is the same mill, built, refashioned by a local builder who has installed a replica cap and a dummy wind shaft which carries the sails. At least that's the hope. You can see a single-story extension which serves as living accommodation, and the tower itself is where the bedrooms are. Next picture, please. There's a close-up of the tower with its representation of a fan cradle. As I said, the replica canister at the front of the cap is where the sail stocks would have been inserted. To these, the sails would have been bolted. The owner hopes that he will be allowed to put replica sails on the mill, but so far, the health and safety executive are not sure they can allow this, but the owner is convinced that if he perseveres, he will be allowed to do so, and I wish him the best of luck. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say thank you to all of you for tuning in tonight. I would like to extend my thanks to Jean, to Graham Ward, to Bob, and to all those at St. Peter's Mayfair for their faith and allowing me to participate. Thank you very much.